And hello everyone, it is Peter Sam the Narrow Gauge Engine here, back with another top 10 video. Today we are looking at the best of the best when it comes to the hit era, seasons 8 to 12. Now despite the highs not being as high as the other two eras we've been discussing, there are still some bangers of episodes we can talk about, and there's no better place to start than with number 10, Dream On. I think the biggest reason as to why this episode is so strong and why so many people like it is due to the moral aspect. Watching Thomas learn acceptance as to what he's strong at and what he's weak at makes for a great episode. Watching Thomas in general in this episode is great, he provides some great entertainment value. His desire to be the fastest, be the cleanest, be the strongest is just fun to see play out on screen. Also, we have Spencer in a secondary role, and he is definitely one of the strongest written characters in the hit era, even if he doesn't have an episode to himself. His comeuppance is as beautiful as the prop of the Duke's crest that Thomas adorns when he takes him to the airport. Also, this is the first big Thomas and Spencer episode. I guess you could argue it's actually topped off Thomas, but Spencer was barely there really, so I don't count it. This rivalry is portrayed well here and manages to continue into one of my favourite Thomas and Friends films, Hero of the Rails. And I think we have this episode partly to thank for that. Strong morals, strong characters, strong episode. Number 9, James the Second Best. The reason this episode made this list is because it does two very strong things. The first of these is the way that James is portrayed throughout the episode. His frustration is amusing, especially when it infringes upon his vanity and egotistical nature. He even forsakes his appearance to end up on a poster and prove a point to the other engines, which for James has got to have taken some balls, and it shows the audience that he craves being on that billboard more than anything. Then there's the crash. It's so fitting, isn't it? Sure, it has a bit of a gimmicky feel to it like with most hit era crashes, but in the end James got what he wanted and didn't like it. A be careful what you wish for moment that gets its message across pretty well. The way he apologises and makes up for his mistake actually feels genuine too, which is also pretty rare for our big red bastard. Now let's talk about the second big reason this episode does so well, and it's the way that Edward is presented throughout. And this should have been the way he's portrayed all the way through the era. None of this Edward strikes out, Edward and the mail saving Edward bollocks. He is shown to be this symbol of perfection who does everything so seamlessly and without fuss. Finally, an episode where he's not a scared little child and is the normal guy with a bit of wisdom up his sleeve that we so crave. The writers actively give him recognition, and the scene that shows this best is the scene when James asks the other engines what makes Edward so special. Whilst their responses aren't the most heartfelt or the most intelligent, there's still a demonstration that a bit of the old Edward is still in the writers' minds, and I like that. So with Edward's representation, James's representation, and that perfect crash, that's why James the Second Best made it onto the list. Number 8, Edward the Great. That was a convenient rhyme, huh? Whereas James the Second Best had these big, important reasons for being on the list, this episode has these smaller, impactful reasons that come together and make a beautiful yet entertaining episode. Once again, we get some recognition for Edward as he beats the snobbish Spencer in a race to the Duke and Duchess's summer house. And yes, it is a summer house and not a normal one. So the Duke and Duchess already had one and built a second in Hero of the Rails, which I find quite funny. When the Duke is blowing all his money on high-rolling gambling games down in Kildane, he has to sleep in the other summer house. The Duchess didn't marry a gambler after all. Let's talk about these little things that help then. I love the jet noises used when Spencer races past Edward to connote the guy's speed and power. It's a cool little detail. Also, the changing pace of Edward's hit era theme to match Edward's speed and determination is cool too. The music slows down as he climbs the hill and then gets faster in tempo as he races down the other side. Then there's the scene. The scene. The one that makes the episode for me. When Gordon sees Spencer winning, he thinks Edward's a useless fool, but then he sees how hard Edward is trying, and those thoughts immediately vacate his mind, replaced by cheers of encouragement from the express engine. It's so adorable, I just have nothing but love for that moment. And even though this story draws parallels to The Tortoise and the Hare, it's a subtle nod rather than an in-your-face type thing. Suck on that, Three Steam Engines Gruff. Andrew Brenner should get on this writer's level, who apparently is Abby Grant. She wrote that big bad Bible that ruined the show in terms of character, so okay, maybe not the entire level, just in terms of this episode, please, Mr. Brenner. Number 7, It's Good to Be Gordon. A phenomenal Gordon episode with a good concept and high stakes at play. The concept of another engine taking Henry's special coal by mistake is a fantastic idea that I'm surprised wasn't used before now, but I'm glad it's used here as it provides Gordon with the idea that maybe he'll puff faster because of it. As he wants to beat his record for the Express, this provides him with an Express advantage. Pardon the pun. And of course, to preserve his long and fruitful friendship with Henry, he lies, and this is such a test for Gordon, as not only does it test his character overall, it tests his friendship too. Then we have these well-structured scenes that show Gordon puffing along grandly and Henry struggling with his work after having to take normal coal. It's a great contrast that's interesting to see play out on screen, and when the pair meet, Henry still roots for Gordon. He cheers him on despite his condition, and Gordon has to sit there knowing that he caused Henry's pain. When Gordon finally does reach Knapford Station, it all comes to a head. He realises that if he crosses that metaphorical finish line and enters the station, he would have truly put himself before his friend for his own gain. So he stops and reverses. This moment's power comes from the unspoken knowledge of why Gordon does what he does. No comment from the narrator, no Gordon saying, "I caused Henry's pain," just him stopping, saying he can't do it, and reversing back to Henry. Then we have this tender swap scene, which is fun enough. It's pretty childlike and done in a way that doesn't feel very ridiculous. Due to it sort of being brushed past, and I don't think it's the most idiotic thing to ever happen. I don't know, just another aspect that I personally like. It reminds me of something I used to do with my Take and Play toys. All of this is great, the whole story, but my favourite part of this episode is the one line where the narrator says, no matter how fast Gordon went, he couldn't escape the bad feeling in his boiler. What an apt and such beautifully put line that is so relatable to the feeling of guilt. But that's enough of this episode, I don't want to be talking about it all day. Let's move on to the next one, shall we? Number 6, Duncan and the Old Mine. It was to be expected that a Duncan episode would make the list as one of the few characters whose traits remain the same from the Switch to the hit era, and I think the choice to make him the protagonist of this episode involving a dangerous mind that could collapse at any moment was the right decision, because Duncan is, and always has been, his own worst enemy. It is so believable that he would end up in a situation like that, and whilst this episode does flitter between that and Rusty looking for him, taking away from the cool mine stuff, at least it keeps things fresh. I like that structure. Speaking of structures, the mindset looks absolutely amazing, and whilst we don't get to see absolutely everything due to the well done lighting, the stuff we do see is all mystical and beautiful looking. These caves themselves are referred to as Culdee Caves, a brilliant reference to the Rack Railway in the railway series known as the Culdee Fell Railway. And if you care about my thoughts on the book that it comes from, there's a 2-hour video documenting my thoughts on every single railway series story, so if you're looking for something to binge, there's nothing better on the channel. If there was something I could critique, what Duncan finds in the end is a bit shit, like a coal train, really. It could be worse though, to be fair. Could have found a train of trucks piled high with Misty on them rescue DVDs. Speaking of that, doesn't the scene of Duncan whistling through the hole in the cave remind you of that scene from the film? You know the one, where they find a blockade of literal feces and get stuck. Maybe this episode was an inspiration for it. And what a good inspiration to choose. Too bad it wasn't enough to stop that film from being an absolute shit show. Ding ding ding, honourable mentions time. The section where I praise episodes that could have made it on the list if these 10 didn't exist. Firstly, let's talk about a season 12 episode that I think did well. Gordon Takes a Shortcut is truly a great episode, with characters like Duck, Oliver, Toad and Stanley making their cameos throughout, and some truly beautiful rustic sets tying the whole thing together. The narrative itself is kinda meh in my opinion, as are most other season 12 episodes, but this one is held in high regard due to the other elements that make it enjoyable to watch. Also, I like the idea of Gordon putting aside his pompous attitude when it's others at risk. Gives an air of decency to a character that kinda just does act like an ass for most of the other episodes in this era that he stars in. Big Strong Henry is another glance into the Gordon and Henry dynamic seen twice in season 10. Henry here tries proving his worth to a conceited Gordon, which I see as adorable personally. The guy just wants his friend's respect, it's cute, even if Gordon is being an ass. See what I told you? Plus, Thomas and Percy rooting for Henry throughout the episode makes it even sweeter. Makes me feel the nice emotions. The last pick comes from season 8, and since I didn't want to mention another Gordon episode for this segment, I opted for the episode that ended up in 4th place in my personal ranking of the season, and that is Thomas Saves the Day. We get the introduction of a new station, which is nice world building. Whilst Kelsthorpe isn't really a prominent recurring place introduced like the Steamworks, it does make its appearances here and there over the years, and even makes it into the season 21 episode The Big Freeze, I believe. Other than that, it has great character expansion for Thomas, showing a new aspect of his dynamic with Annie and Clarabelle, as well as a glorious runaway. With all of this out of the way, it is time to tackle the top half of the list. Let's go. Number 5, Cool Truckings. A good wintertime episode is always valued by me. Too bad many episodes within the hit era that are set during this time period suck. Don't Tell Thomas, Snowplow, Tricky Tree and Scar Louie the Brave all being examples of this. This episode introduces the audience to Madge, who is a quirky little badass with a cool design. I've always had a soft spot for Madge as the best of the season 11 newbies. As much as Hector had his good episode, I feel Madge was more developed upon within the season she was introduced, and overall made her a lot stronger. Within this episode, her development comes in the form of learning the ability to say no to Duncan, who is such a chaotic energy within this episode, still managing to stay a charming protagonist whilst causing the mayhem that unfolds on screen. When the worst happens and Madge crashes, she pulls herself back to safety and learns that being fun isn't all that important by herself. I do quite like that aspect of this episode. As much as it's probably seen in other episodes within the era, I like how Madge learns her lesson without the inclusion of an authoritative force. It really does show how much growth a character can go through. Speaking of character, Madge really is the lucky exception. When have we ever had the road vehicles take centre stage like that within Hit Era episodes before? You could argue Thomas and the Tuber, but that was more about Thomas than Trevor, Bertie, and Elizabeth. It has his name in the title after all. This makes this episode seem like an escape from the norm, while still having that railway element in there in the form of Duncan. Then there's the absolute wacky stuff that is just so goofy and makes me crack a smile. Madge spinning around 360 degrees, spraying the policeman, there's some good humour there. This episode is an absolute joy with its silly antics and good character building. Truly one of the best of the era. I was surprised too at how a season 12 episode could end up this high, but truly it is a gem, and despite it coming from the Black Sheep season, it is the standout. Like we mentioned earlier with Gordon Takes a Shortcut, the characters brought to centre stage is a great utilisation. Stanley gets a minor role, and taking the place of secondary character is Hector the Horrid himself. Within this episode we get to see him give advice to James, which is something very new and interesting to think about, a truck that isn't out for complete destruction and wants to help. What a unique concept. Plus, as it was with the previous episode that we spoke about, the winter aesthetic is on show. Rather than being more whimsical and beautiful like with Cool Truckings though, it's more grey, foreboding and dangerous, really highlighting the situation James and Hector are in, and how James's inability to take advice from Hector puts them all at risk. James himself is characterised perfectly too. Of course he wouldn't want to take advice from a piece of rolling stock who he perceives as lesser than him. When the pair do begin to work together though, it is great to see, and I think they bounce off each other fairly well. I think it would have been a great dynamic to see further developed on and explored. Unfortunately, we ended up with stuff like Buzzy Bees and Up Up and Away instead. Now it is a season 12 episode we're talking about, so the CGI isn't the best and the repetitive nature can be a bit frustrating, but I think those are mere minor footnotes of criticism compared to the amazing display of things on offer here. Season 12 is not good, and I think that's fairly obvious as to why when you look at the episodes, but this is the true exception to that because of how out of the box it is, and how well it manages to be despite that. Number 3, Thomas and the New Engine. I know, some people don't like this one, and that's okay, I just think it's very well crafted. I like what the episode focuses on, that being the idea of how easy it is to misconstrue a situation when you don't have the full facts, and how it is presented with a new character getting the most fallout from this. The new character himself, Neville, is very well designed too, looking both like a Diesel and a Steamy just to further strengthen the plot, and it allows for this Diesel versus Steamy idea to re-emerge. It can be badly done, but I think its subtlety as a background idea makes it work here. The other plot shown throughout the episode is the reconstruction of a bridge by Abbey Station. Whilst not an amazing side plot, it does lead to one of my favourite scenes in the Hit Era, where Thomas and Emily confront Neville, who runs away before being told the truth by Toby. Then Thomas realises Neville is heading towards the bridge and has to rescue him. I like how it all unravels here, as we the audience know the entire truth, quite the antithesis to episodes like Haunted Henry, where we're left in the dark with the characters, so to see bits and pieces of the truth start to come to Thomas in the short space of time is quite satisfying to me. First he realises how what he said has spun into this giant rumour that is completely false, then he comes to the knowledge that Neville isn't a bad engine at all, and then he realises the danger that he is facing. Plus Neville is pulling Annie and Clarabelle, so Thomas's gossipy behaviour and less than warm welcome to Neville has put his faithful coaches at risk too. I quite like the climax as well, with the cool smash into the barrier and Neville is left teetering off the edge of the bridge. It's quite a spectacular use of props. Now yes, there are flaws, of course, it's a Hit Era episode, I wouldn't call any absolutely perfect. Everybody's out of character and the ending is quite quick and not as good as restoring the peace as I would have liked, but I feel there is a lot to appreciate and far more than there is to dislike. That's why this episode made it up as far as it did. Number 2, Respect for Gordon. This episode is similar to the ones from season 17, which have two characters and both are in the wrong to some extent, like the Switch. Neither Luke or Millie are completely right when they think their work is more difficult than the others, and the same is true here between Gordon and the rest of the STEAM team. Gordon is right, pulling the Express is a difficult job, and Emily and Henry agree with this later on. However, he shouldn't demand respect from his peers, he should earn it. However, the other engines are also right. Gordon's attitude is very egotistical and pompous, but they all should realise that he does pull his weight and should be treated with some respect. And in all fairness, that is how the resolution of this episode plays out, with both parties realising what they did wrong and conceding to the other, leading to compromise. The classic era's runtime wouldn't really allow for things like this, and that is the beauty of this era. Sometimes more actually does mean more and not less. Well, that's the moral aspect of this episode talked about. Now let's discuss some other good things. The crash is amazing, and the fact that the jam kinda looks like blood sometimes is funny to me, if a bit morbid. We also get another instance of Gordon's age on display as his boiler begins clunking, and is also a new aspect of insecurity for the guy. That was definitely something lacking in him, especially in the later classic series. He barely had any weak spots apart from that one time Thomas went faster than him, so it's nice to see here. I also enjoyed watching the other engines rip into Gordon, especially Percy. It feels like his old classic personality is coming out again. This episode is beloved by many, and it's fairly easy to see why, as it works so well with how it's structured and uses its runtime to maximise story potential. A true Hit Era great. Now on to the top pick. Number 1, Halloween. Now I don't think any Hit Era episode is really what I'd call perfect, but I think this is pretty damn close, like absurdly close. I think the prop work is spectacular, with that ghostly sheet that falls on Emily being quite cool, and the scrap engine at the beginning immediately setting the tone that this isn't going to be your run-of-the-mill Thomas episode. The characters themselves in this episode are quite strong too. It's nothing unique or pairings you wouldn't expect to work but do, just Thomas and Emily. And I think when given good direction, it's quite strong pairing. I just don't think it's presented in that way very often because of the direction of the writing at the time. Also, Ari and Bert are good antagonists. They're nowhere near as scary as they were before, but I think they suit this kind of tamer plot quite well. Plus, they get what they deserve in the end, so it's all good. As much as the props are cool and the lighting is beautiful and so well done, where this episode captures my attention the most is with the sounds. Firstly, I think Angelus does some decently good narration here. He's not as good as in his heyday, but he's still solid and captures that eerie mystery of the scrapyard rather well. He also captures the intensity and the excitement of the chase well too. Oh yeah, the chase sequence is amazing in this, one of the best parts of the episode to be honest, and another favourite scene of mine from the Hit Era as a whole. And a lot of that also has to come from the sound, namely the music. The shrill screams, the foreboding nature of it, it's rhythmic yet still catches you off guard, it's disturbing yet enticing. Truly a masterful score in a masterful episode. Now, I know what you're thinking for those of you that have watched my Season 8 re-ranking video. Have I gotten over the ghost? For those unaware, I previously found the animated ghost that appeared at the end of the episode a bit of a mood ruiner. But to be honest, now I don't mind it at all. It's for 2 seconds, and it's a goofy little goober. The ghost can stay. So that was my top 10 Hit Era episodes. I'm sure some of you will disagree with me, and feel free to down in the comments, but let's just keep things nice and respectful. Opinions are like kitchen knives, we've all got one, but let's not use it as an excuse to harm others. Thank you all for the support with this series so far, and I can't wait to wrap it all up next time with the last top 10 of the bunch. I've been Peter Sam, you've been you, and oh my god, Duncan's just busted into the shed with a bunch of Misty Island rescue stands. You'll never take me alive, you fucks! Blam 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 blam.